All right, final item is number 11, finance report. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. Now that Spencer's got you warmed up for financial items, I'm before you to present you with the 6 months financial report through December 31st, 2018. And tonight I'll be providing a very high-level overview, the first 6 months operations for both the general fund and the city's utility funds, the major operating funds of the city. On February 26th, we'll be providing a Budget 101 workshop, providing an overall budget overview for City Council and city staff. That will give you a more in-depth review of each of the individual types of funds and more information as it relates to the city's budget. Tonight, basically the workshop will be more forward-thinking. This is looking backwards to what's already happened for the first 6 months of the fiscal year. This is the overview of the city's general fund at the very highest level. It shows the original budget as adopted by City Council last year in June with all the amendments. The pointer here. I know there's got to be a pointer.
It's not on, Robin.
Judy, do you know which button? There it is, green light, okay. In the budget column, that's our fund balance at the beginning of the year per the city's comprehensive annual financial report. The revenues that were budgeted at the time the budget was adopted with all the amendments for any grants that we've received, and then the expenditures. The reason expenditures are out of alignment with budget is due to encumbrance carryovers at the beginning of the fiscal year. Anything that was an open purchase order from last year that carried over into this year, where we had ordered goods or services, but we didn't actually owe the money because we hadn't taken a receipt of whatever the services or the goods were that were to be provided to the city. That said, the original adopted budget was $42.1 million in expenditures. To that, we've added several items. The largest was grant-funded appropriations of $1,196,100, prior year purchase orders of $462,000, the additional unfunded actuarial liability payment that we made to CalPERS in September, $454,300 was general fund. The Safer Grant local match share of just under $207,000. And other items of $19,000, bringing us to the total shown here of $44.4 million in appropriations as of December 31st. With that said, it does show on an actual basis over here that we're in a deficit position as of December 31st. That's very typical of our activity level. Our property tax revenues don't come in until February, so we're always in a deficit position as of December 31st. So council shouldn't be alarmed about that. It's a pooled cash issue where we're drawing on other city resources to keep the general fund afloat during the first 6 months of the fiscal year. I look at it every year. This is very typical. It's actually even less than what it was last year. So that said, we're in good financial shape. The UAL payment that's included in here, as far as expenditures that you see there, the $454,000 that I mentioned was an additional payment. The total payment was $3,874,000 that we made all in July for the entire fiscal year. So half of that would be attributable to the second half of the fiscal year. Can you advance the slide for me, Judy? I don't know why it's not doing that. Thank you. This is set up to show you the yellow portion is the percentage of cash received as of December 31st, adding up to a share of the rest of the gray line. The end of the gray line is 100%. So what you're seeing there, property tax, for example, is very, very small because we don't receive any property tax revenues until February typically. These are some small cleanup payments that the city received, but for the most part, those revenues come in February and May with a small cleanup in August of the following year. We're 50% through the fiscal year as of December 31st. Sales tax is just under what we would expect to see for the fiscal year, but we've had a lot of anomalies with sales tax due to CDTFA and their software conversion. So that's all kind of catching up with itself as they process payments and get their software system up and running. By the end of the year, we're confident that this will all be very, very close to what we've projected in our budget estimates. As far as assessed valuations, they came in 4.89% increased over last year per Sutter County's assessed valuations for our general fund. The budget included a projected 4.3% increase, so slightly over what finance projected will come in by the end of the fiscal year. Thank you, Judy. I always show City Council 14 quarters of data for sales tax because it's the largest revenue for the city's general fund. You can see that in recent quarters it's been mostly positive. The last 2 quarters on a cash basis are very low, being down 10% and then being up 15.9%. That was all due to the CDTFA adjustments where they were doing their software system conversion. Overall, the last 2 quarters, our auditors say we're up 0.1% and up 1.9% to the best of their audit abilities, giving all of the late reporting, duplicate reporting, etc. I feel confident, though, that by the end of the fiscal year, we will meet the projections that we have in our budget. Hotel motel surcharge revenues exceed 25% for the first quarter in our cash receipts that we received. We don't expect to hit 50% for this particular revenue category because at the midpoint of the year, we don't receive the December report until January from all the motel hotel owners locally. Building permit revenues are at 50.4 of our budget estimate, showing the seasonal uptick of development that occurred in the summer and the fall months. They've leveled off currently, and we expect to see an uptick again in the spring. Special police services are at 32.5% of the amount budgeted, but again, we have quarterly billings that go out on that, and we won't receive those revenues until January. So it's, again, a cash flow timing issue. Business licenses are only at 13.3%, but that's because we send out revenues. We send out the business licenses annually in January, so those have just gone out within the last month and a half. In summary, Finance currently anticipates the majority of City General Fund revenues to be right on track with budget estimates by the end of the fiscal year. On the expenditure side of the equation, this slide is set up the same way, where if the yellow went all the way across, we would reach 100%. It shows you that salaries and benefits are at 52.4% midway through the year, in excess of the 50%. Again, this goes back to the payment of the city's unfunded liability to CalPERS in July. We paid it to save interest charges and fronted the money in July, but it's for the whole year. I took that payment and cut it in half, and that would show if we hadn't done it all at once to save money, we'd be at 46.7%, and we would estimate budgetary savings in salaries and benefits for the general fund at about $340,000 through December 31st. 43.8% of the amounts budgeted for operating material, supplies, and services have been expended halfway through the year. The total general fund expenditures equal 50.1% of the amount budgeted as of December 31st. So on track, given the fact that we prepaid PERS. I have one more slide that contains citywide information, not just general fund data, and then I'm going to move on to water and wastewater. This shows the city's pension liabilities as of June 30th. It shows you the assets in the safety fund here, miscellaneous there, and total citywide. Shows you the liabilities for the safety plans, miscellaneous and total. And then what we refer to as the unfunded liability, the amount that CalPERS says we owe based upon past service estimates versus with the assets that we have on hand with them. For our safety plan, it's $36.5 million. and that compares to the prior year. It's up. It was 35.9 million last year, just to give you an idea how it's changed in a year's time. And the miscellaneous plan, the unfunded liability is now 33.8 million. That is down 3.6 million. It was 37.4 million last year. The total net unfunded pension liabilities are 70.3 million, and if you offset that by what we have saved in our pension stabilization trust as of December 31st, shows we have a net pension liability of about 67.7 million. Moving on to the city's water utility. Water fund operating revenues are at 52.4% of budget. Water revenue increases were 10% approved effective July 1st, 2018 in order to cover operating, debt service, and infrastructure renewal and replacement costs. Revenue from billings are being generated as planned. However, consumption declined in 4 out of the first 6 months of the fiscal year, thereby causing revenues to drop below the expected 10% increase. And I'll show you that on the next slide in just a minute. So it would appear revenues are coming in as expected, but that's not the entire story. The rest of the story is that revenues are typically higher in July, August, and September when people are watering their yards, planting their gardens, watering their gardens, etc. A few other things to review with you before we move on to the details of the 6 months of billing. Capital connection fee revenues are at 46.1% of the amount budgeted. Operating expenditures are at 48.1%. They're less than budget expectations at this time of year. We would expect it to be closer to 50%. I looked to see why. Salaries and benefits, there was some savings there. So we have 4.75 vacant positions. I know it sounds weird to say 4.75, but water and wastewater often share positions. And then the operation and maintenance accounts were also less than expected. Debt service only includes the December 1st interest payment. Principal and interest are paid on the outstanding bonds on June 1st, so that's when the largest payment goes out for debt service. Through December 31st, we've only had one interest payment. The monthly utility billing comparisons. I apologize, my colors don't show up real well here. Revenues are across the top comparing 17-18 for each month. From one year to the next. And then the change in revenue percentage here shows you that revenues were up, for example, in July by 10.4%. They were up 7.9% in August, and so on and so forth. On my slide, this is a different color, so it's a little easier to see. I'm sorry it didn't show up real well on the screen. The consumption data here are the units that were billed by finance. You can see the change in consumption here was in July. We were up 1.6%, down 2.6% in August, down 3.2% in September, and so on and so forth. So I averaged the change in revenues to see for the first 6 months of the year how close we came to the 10% we were expecting, and the average was 8.08%. So pretty close. The delta there was all due to the decrease in consumption. The wastewater fund operating revenues were at 49.3% of budget, right in line with budget expectations, very, very close. Capital connection fee revenues are at 24.6%, significantly less. I followed up with Diana and we discussed this to try to determine the rationale behind it. And what we determined is oftentimes when people pay connection fees, they vary depending upon the size of the water connection, whether it's a 1-inch connection, a 2-inch connection, etc. So the revenues could come in higher for water connection fees than what the sewer connections are, because typically those are just a one size connection and one charge. So we were able to better determine and understand why one would be higher than the other. Because you think when construction happens, a developer would pay a connection fee and they would be somewhat equal as far as the percentages, and that's not necessarily the case. Looking at expenditures, they were at 43.7 43.7% of the amount budgeted and are therefore significantly less than expected. Looking to see why, it was two categories, salaries and benefits. There was 3.75 full-time equivalent positions that were vacant. And the biggest one was professional services. They're significantly less than budgeted, but what I was able to see in reviewing the detailed reports is we haven't expended the money by sending a check yet, but the funds are committed in the way of a purchase order. We have a lot of outstanding purchase orders for professional services, and I know that's something that City Council has inquired about in the past. So as part of the Budget 101 presentation, City staff is aggregating all the professional services expenditures on a citywide basis, on a department by department basis, to show you where those funds are being spent and what they're being utilized for, so that you'll have a better understanding and more information in that regard. So that'll be coming next week to you during the Budget 101 session. That said, I don't anticipate that by the end of the fiscal year we'll have that much savings, because we do have all those funds committed in the way of purchase orders. Only a couple more slides left. I left last year's slide into my presentation. This is as of December 31st, 2017. I want to explain this to you, and I want you to see the change from last year to this year. Finance has been tracking the amount of capital connection fees available for payment of debt service for many years due to the decline in development activities. The decline has resulted in a corresponding decline in the amount of connection fee revenues received by the city. We maintain these funds on a separate basis for connection fees. We look at the enterprise utilities as a whole. What you see in the city's CAFR is the water utility and the wastewater utility separate. But we track things very distinctly and separately. We have operating funds for each of the utilities. We have connection fee funds where we have those restricted funds that can only be used for improvements that benefit new development. And we have debt service funds that the only purpose for those funds is to service debt service. They pay interest and principal. They hold bond reserves per trustee agreements that are required, set aside funds per bond covenants. And then we have CIP funds that we track for each of the utility funds for their capital improvement program budgets that span potentially more than one fiscal year typically. That said, we look at the capital connection fee funds every year on a separate basis and compare the amount of debt service that we have to pay every year. In this case, for example, as I said, this is last year's data. We have $1.5 million in annual debt service for the water fund. The cash available was deficit. We've been watching this for years, and we were concerned that it was going to become deficit. It did last year. The wastewater fund still was fine last year. We had the 1.2 years of debt service coverage that we like to see on the books. We were about 6 months in the whole last fiscal year. Another way of looking at this ratio is the cash required that we'd have to have in the bank to meet the 1.2% coverage is about $1.8 million. If we were in the hole that much, that's how much short we are. I always like to look and compare. This is the standard that we would like to see. This is where we're at. So we've struggled with this and hoped that development would occur. It's not at the level that we would like to see. So it's important to me that City Council know where we're at with this. We've talked at the staff level because we made improvements, for example, on the water fund side, which was supposed to be funded 75% from connection fees. We're not getting those revenues in. If those improvements had a 30-year useful life, we're roughly 14 years into those bonds now. The 16 years in the future, if development occurs, they're only going to get the benefit whenever they come online and start receiving the benefit of the improvements. So as city staff, we're going to go back and take a look at this at some point and start likely coming to council and asking if we can adjust those percentages, because it doesn't make sense to keep charging connection fees and getting it further into the hole. That said, I'll show you what it looks like as of December 31st of 18. Thank you, Judy. Significantly different. The cash available as of December 31st, 18 is now $2,200,000 to the negative for our connection fee fund. And again, there's a very heavy debt service load on the connection fee fund, paying 75% of old improvements that were done in 2002 and 2005 when we sold bonds originally for the water fund. So as staff, I'm wanting to make you aware that this is something we need to take a good hard look at and rectify, possibly looking backwards, some of the payments that were made, figuring out what might be a more appropriate and or fair ratio. Because at the end of the day, we have to make our debt service payments that we've covenanted to as part of our bond agreements. We don't want to default on our bonds. But if there's no capital connection fee funds there, our bond covenants say operating revenues shall cover this cost. So this is showing you that as of December 31st, we were 1.34 years in the hole on the water side, 1.09 years of coverage available on the wastewater. Again, looking at it from a completely different perspective down on the bottom, if the required ratio that's recommended by our bond covenants is 1.2, then our cash requirement would be 1.8 and 979,000, call it $1 million. The amount we're short is a much bigger number. So I wanted to show you last year's and then combine it with this year's to show you that our problem is getting worse. And it's time that I think we have a serious conversation about solving the problem instead of kicking it down the road. So coming in the future, that'll be something that I'll be bringing back to you. And with that, I'll answer any questions. Yeah. Thank you.
Through the mayor, I'm going to beat Shaw on this one. Robin, you have made accounting enjoyable and at the same time very real. So thank you. I appreciate how you presented those. I don't know if you did this or your team helped out with it.
We all work on it together. Yes, absolutely.
It was really well done. So I
Thank
I
you.
appreciate that. I like the fact that you were able to do the comparisons of 1 year to the next, to kind of give us an understanding of possibly where we're heading. And the reality is that there's some big decisions are going to need to be made here. And but with your leadership, I feel very confident, and with Diana's leadership as well, confident that we can try to do some well thought out decisions. And I encourage the community to come to the workshop next Tuesday, right? 5 o'clock. Are we meeting in here?
Yes.
Yeah, 5:15 here in the
5:15
council
in this
chambers.
room. So it's open to the community and staff and city staff as well, right? Anyone can come in
Absolutely.
and listen to all of the information that we will listen to at the same time. So as we move forward in making some decisions, there is clear information given to all of us pretty much at the same time. So there is no surprises of the numbers of what you see. Right. And so with this, I have a much clearer understanding, and I appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to really make this easier for those of us that are not a Shaw financial advisor, travels the world on a private jet. I don't know. But anyhow, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Through the mayor, can I have that private jet she's alluding to? I'm teasing. Robin. Say what?
When I'm done with it.
Oh, okay, when you're done with it. Robin, first of all, I just want to say thank you. Great job. That last slide was rather depressing.
I know.
But I do like the fact that you brought it to us and said it's time we make some decisions, because I think this council is ready to step up and do what's needed to be done for a long time and make the decisions and fix things. So I look forward to working further on this. I appreciate it. Just want to
Thank
say
you.
thanks.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Robin. I too appreciate all the effort you and your staff have put into. I also echo what Councilmember Shaw said. The heads up, the train is coming. We really appreciate that. It gives us kind of food for thought until it
Thank
does.
you. I've been saying well, for many years that it was going to go negative. We just didn't know when. And then it did. And then this year, it was so far in the red that I was like, okay, I need to show the comparison of where we were a year ago along with where we are now to kind of show the transition of how we got to where we're at.
Sure.
And then some proposed ideas for solutions, because I don't want to bring you a problem without bringing you what I see as a potential solution for consideration.
Appreciate that. That said, any member of the public would like to comment? Please feel free to come on up. All right.